everyone, and welcome to the Daily Signal's Top 10, a show where we bring you the top news stories of the week, many of which often go underreported by the mainstream media. And joining me to break all of this down is Daily Signal's senior contributor Jarrett Setman and commentary editor Daniel Davis. Thanks for joining us, guys.
Thank you for having us.
Great to be here.
And even though it is August and things are still pretty slow here on Capitol Hill, it was yet another busy news week. So let's hop right into it. Topping us off at the number 10 spot, President Trump fired back at the media for complaining about the different tones he used in his back-to-back speeches. Take a look.
By following the heroic example of those who fought to preserve our republic, we can find the inspiration our country needs to unify, to heal, and to remain one nation under God. I openly called for unity, healing, and love, and they know it because they were all there. So what I did is I thought I'd take just a second, and I'm really doing this more than anything else, because you know where my heart is, okay? I'm really doing this to show you how damn dishonest these people are. You've left your families, charged into danger, faced down your enemies, and bore the scars and wounds of war. Each of you took an oath to support and defend the Constitution. With that oath, you pledged your honor and your very lives for our great nation.
All right, so three pretty different speeches. Jarrett, what do you take from that?
Yeah, you know, I think there's a lot of nitpicking coming from the media. I think this is something that we've seen since the Republican primaries and throughout Donald Trump's campaigns, is that, frankly, he's very good at speaking to different audiences in different places and having a different tone. I think that the media kind of sees one thing with these speeches and the regular people see something else. I think his Phoenix speech was one of the better ones he's given in a while. So, you know, I think there's a lot of over-the-top attacks on Trump for how he speaks and what he does that, frankly, says one thing to the members of the media and another thing to the general public.
Daniel, what do you think about how the media handled it?
Yeah, frankly, I think if he had done the opposite, if he had used the same tone, they would probably be criticizing him for that. I mean, it seems to be really nitpicking. I don't think there's a whole lot to it. In fact, it seems to me a plus to be able to speak to different audiences that are very different in unique ways that speaks to them. I think that's a plus in a president. He spoke to the members of the military in a certain tone, you know, setting forth his Afghanistan policy. He spoke to his supporters in Arizona, you know, very much of a rally atmosphere. I think it's a positive.
Well, speaking of the mainstream media, up next we have some pretty shocking news from Don Lemon. Let's listen.
What you guys say, and they don't trust the elites in Washington. And so what he was saying is, hey, they think they're elite. They want to tell us what to do. They want to run our life. They've sold our jobs out. I'm going to unify the country. At the end of the day, we're the elite because we really understand what's going on. That's what he was saying last night.
Well, John,
so
let me just say this.
It's like, it's
Let me
just
say this.
laughable.
And
This is why you guys are going to lose again.
Jason
You're
can
gonna lose
defend
again,
himself.
Don.
Listen, don't put. it's not you. Don't put me in the category. I'm not a partisan.
The Democrats are going to lose
Okay,
again.
I'm not a Democrat, so don't put me in that category.
The Democrats are not you,
And
the
number
Democrats.
two, listen, maybe you wear panties. I don't. So if your panties get in a wad, then that's your business. But I don't wear
Don,
panties to get in a wad.
A pretty interesting news segment there. Don Lemon's not a Democrat. Is that what we need to see from people like main anchors on CNN? Is like panties in a wad? He's not a Democrat. What are we talking about?
Yeah, that seemed a little bit beneath the news anchor in my view. But you know, his "I'm not a Democrat" line, I think, is really evasive, and it tries to deflect from the fact that he really is a liberal anchor. I mean, forget whether or not he endorses the party label, whether or not he's a registered. I'm not registered in a party, but I'm clearly conservative. And a lot of news anchors, especially organizations like CNN, want to portray themselves as objective and neutral, but they actually have a political ideology that informs the way they operate. So I think it would be a lot better, even to have someone like Chris Matthews or Rachel Maddow from MSNBC, who are openly Democratic supporters and liberal. At least you know what you're getting. But with someone like Don Lemon, who's trying to have it both ways, that's not helpful.
Jared, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it gives life the idea that there's an objective media, so to speak. I mean, I was fortunate enough to go on Lemon's show last week, and it was, it was a very interesting experience, but I mean, one couldn't think going on the show that this was objective. I mean, all these different, groups are all attacking President Trump. The guest who went on before me actually called Donald Trump's agenda a Nazi agenda throughout the segment. So, look, I mean, Don Lemon has a point of view. I think that's fair enough. I mean, every media outlet, every person does. I think this idea that the media is objective and above it all, I think if you're tuning in to CNN every night, it's pretty obvious that they're not objective and they're not just being straight with the facts. So I think that Lemon saying, well, I'm not a Democrat, I frankly just don't think the American people buy that. Certainly anybody who spent an hour watching his show on a nightly program, it's just, frankly, it's fantasy. And it's something that generally I don't think that a reasonable, rational person would buy.
Yeah. Now, our number 8 story is about a Democrat, and it also involves President Trump's youngest son.
Daily Caller, for whatever reason, because they did not have enough to do, because the eclipse wasn't enough to keep them happy, decided to criticize the clothing worn by Barron Trump. The headline was, it's about time the president's son starts dressing the part. Some might suggest it's about time the Daily Caller, keeps opinions like this to itself. People like Chelsea Clinton, let me read this, I have it right here. Chelsea Clinton, in other words, says, it's high time the media and everyone leave Barron Trump alone and let him have the private childhood he deserves.
Now, that was nice of Chelsea, but, I mean, why are we talking about Barron's style? What should he be wearing? Should he be wearing a suit? I'm just confused about why we're talking about this.
Right. I mean, it's kind of ridiculous bringing, frankly, the president's children, and especially in the case of Barron Trump. I mean, this child is in grammar school. I mean, should he be at the center of any kind of media controversy? Let this kid live his own life. That he was maybe not dressed the way that some people in the media attack him for. Frankly, we're talking about the objectivity of the media. If this was Obama's kids, would they be saying something very, very different? So, I think it's, I guess good on Chelsea. She was obviously a president's daughter, and she had to deal with some media attacks and things like that. When it's a young person who's kind of in the formative periods of their life, when they're in the White House, they shouldn't be attacked. Now, when they get older, when they're adults and they do step into the political fray, I think fair game then. I think Chelsea has a reason to be attacked now from detractors. But when it's a little boy who's in grammar school, just leave the poor child alone. He has enough to deal with.
Right, and this isn't the first time Barron Trump has been attacked. A few months ago, an SNL writer tweeted that he would be the country's first homeschool shooter. I mean, what do you think about the media just focusing on poor little Barron?
It's not fair. I mean, he's a 11-year-old kid, right? 10, 11 years old. I mean, we see this with lots of presidents and, the royal family in Great Britain. Like, the kids are kids. We need to let them be kids and have their lives before they decide to step into this world. He didn't decide to be a president's kid. So, I mean, could he be dressed a little nicer? Yeah, sure. But, we don't know all the facts. Maybe he has to dress up at school every day and is off school right now and wants to wear a T-shirt. I think we need to give him some breathing room. Don't bring them into the political drama.
Absolutely. Well, speaking of letting kids be kids, that brings us to our number 7 story. Watch this.
And teachers speaking out tonight about a teacher who read books to her kindergartner class, and also during that time, that kindergartner was going through a transition in front of her peers, and tonight that teacher spoke out.
And what I will share over and over again is how proud I was of my students.
An emotional Rockland Academy teacher addressing a packed house of parents, many furious about her decision to discuss the topic of gender identity inside her kindergarten class.
It was never my intent to harm any students, only to support them through a difficult situation.
The teacher defended her actions to read 2 books she says were given to her by a transgender child going through a transition.
The kindergartners came home very confused about whether or not you can pick your gender, whether or not they really were a boy or a girl.
Okay, so this is not fake news. This actually happened. Yeah. I mean, can you believe that, Daniel? I just can't even understand.
Yeah, it was earlier this summer in a California charter school. A young kid brought in some books. He's a kid whose parents affirm his gender transition that he's going through. This is in kindergarten. And he brought some books into the teacher, and the teacher said, oh, let me read this to the whole class and teach kids that they can actually choose their gender. And as you saw in the video, parents were really upset. They weren't asked about this in advance, whether or not they wanted their kids to be exposed. Ironically, the teachers have to run sex ed material by the parents, but they don't have to run this kind of thing on gender identity. So parents were up in arms. I would just say to parents, in America we have a very strong tradition of parents having real ownership in local public schools. So in a day like ours where things are changing, take advantage of that and see what your kids are learning. In Canada, things are also happening like this. They don't have as much control. So see what the teachers are teaching your kids.
And one of the parents said that her daughter came home crying because she was like, am I going to turn into a boy? Like, what does this mean? I mean, I can't imagine as a 5-year-old hearing that and not knowing what was going to go on.
Yeah.
Like,
it really is incredible. I mean, these are kids that are just learning the ABCs, and now they have to learn the ABCs of gender identity. I mean, it's shocking to see this, and it's shocking that it's being imposed on a lot of children. I wrote a story last month about Minnesota, the Minnesota Department of Education putting these new transgender guidelines on kids as young as kindergarten. I mean, that's an absurd thing. I mean, just thinking back from when I was in school, I mean, what do you know when you're a kindergartner? You're just learning the basics of life. And I think this really, frankly, it makes an argument for why things like school choice are so necessary. I mean, when you're a parent and you have a child in a school like this, what do? I think it's why it's so important that we have other options for parents to say, well, those schools, they don't represent my values. They've had these other ones imposed on my child who has gone home crying. I'm going to look for another option in my community. I think that's a really important thing now, is that they're undermining, this idea of the public school as a place where you can just send your kids without worry.
Absolutely. It's terrifying. But back to school, and it's also back to football season. It's finally upon us. But you know what that means? More national anthem drama.
There was an additional storyline to emerge from last night's game less than a week after Hugh Jackson said he would prefer his players not protest during the national anthem. The Browns responded by holding the league's largest protest since Colin Kaepernick in August of last year. Nearly a dozen players went to their knee during the national anthem before last night's game against the Giants.
Okay, that's the largest protest that we've seen so far. Jarrett, what do you think about that? What are they standing for? What are they actually proving?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is just part of this long-term move to politicize sports, and it's been very unfortunate in the NFL. We've had this kind of string of protests where people are not standing for the national anthem, this very unifying thing in this country. I mean, I think everybody remembers what happened after 9/11. All the players waving the American flag, saying we are one country, and now you're seeing people standing down for it. And I think it's a real problem for the NFL. I mean, these Browns players decided to do this. Frankly, there wasn't a whole lot of reasons to watch the Browns. They've been pretty abysmal for the last decade. I can't imagine this is good for viewership for a team that's so bad. But it's just kind of a sad thing. Sports are a bit of a distraction for the American people, and something that we kind of all come together, people of different creeds, sit down and watch. And it's really sad to see this politicization, which we kind of talk about every week on the show. I think a lot of people start to tune out. They say, I'm not going to watch. I'm tired of these guys making political statements, disrespecting the American flag, the American people. I'm just not going to tune in anymore. I'm not going to. And I think the polls, show that the viewership is down, the NFL and networks like ESPN that have politicized their sports in a terrible manner.
And stay tuned for our #1 story if you're interested in that. But Daniel, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think, sports, we've talked about this before on Top 10, sports is something that Americans turn to get away from politics. We hear all throughout the week, Monday through Friday, especially if you're in a place like D.C., you hear all about politics. It's increasingly a part of our lives as Americans, this national politics, which is not a good development. And so sports is one of those things that we try to get away from politics. And so, hopefully, my hope is that, the viewers will make real demands and that the market will be affected and teams will stop taking on this kind of risk, and we won't see this as much. But we'll see how it pans out this year.
You can only pray. And the main player that comes to mind when it comes to the national anthem is none other than Colin Kaepernick. He won't stand for the national anthem, but thousands of people are standing up for him. Check out what they're doing.
This season, Colin Kaepernick took a knee during the national anthem to protest the mistreatment of blacks in America. Today, at a rally at NFL headquarters in New York, people stood up to protest what's happening to Kaepernick.
This is not a shock to a lot of us. We've been trying to tell this country for a whole long time what we've been going through, and people would not listen.
Okay, Jarrett, same thing. What are we seeing here?
Yeah, I mean, obviously Colin Kaepernick is the player who kind of sparked this round of protests and guys standing down. I think we talked about before how abysmal it is that the Black History Museum at the Smithsonian has decided to honor this guy over, Justice Clarence Thomas, a man who has such an impact, was the second Black American to be on the Supreme Court, that they honored Colin Kaepernick, who frankly is a crummy backup quarterback who now finds himself unemployed. And I think there's of course a lot of, screeching about, well, why isn't Kaepernick on a team right now? I think even some other players have recently, LaShawn McCoy, who's a player for the Buffalo Bills, says, well, the reason he's not employed is because teams don't want to take on this kind of baggage. He's not good enough to justify all the crazy circus that's involved with this. And I think, he may grumble about it, and it's too bad that we have to celebrate a guy like Colin Kaepernick who, frankly, disrespected the American flag and has tuned so many people out. So frankly, it's a kind of sad thing for the sport to see this kind of spiral out of control after the initial protests of Colin Kaepernick.
Right. Daniel?
I think Jared hit right on the head. It's not something that we celebrate in sports. I have to hope that teams don't take on this kind of thing, and that sports can once again unify Americans rather than divide us.
Absolutely. Well, switching gears here a little, at number 4, we have a lighthearted story of what true patriotism looks like. Check out what these 2 cute little kids did.
It was pouring rain and time to go home, but 11-year-old Nate Helmuth and Isaac Davis, 2 best friends, were thinking about the American flag. Helmuth has military parents, including a father who was wounded in the Army.
I felt like it was the respectful thing to do.
Coppergate Elementary School media specialist Kim Emakowski saw the boys in the rain and took a picture. She posted it to the school's Facebook page with the caption, "This is what respect looks like at Coppergate." It's been shared more than 400 times.
They were folding the flag reverently. They were reverent. And they were doing 13 folds. And, our country is kind of in a little bit of turmoil. And it just struck me.
Davis also instinctively knows the picture is bringing out the good in people.
Feel like we have good people in our country and that we should all be good.
Okay, Jarrett, how awesome is that? Don't we need more stories like that in the mainstream media?
Absolutely. I think actually this does represent the mainstream of America. I think most Americans think, we respect the American flag. We have very different views and opinions from others. But this is, look, America's a creedal nation. We're based on certain ideas. We're a very diverse country. We're a huge country. That the flag is something that really unites us. And to see these little boys treat it with such respect is a great thing. I think it upholds a very long tradition. I think it's something that we as Americans have to be very proud of. I think, in this debate over monuments and statues and stuff like that, I think the majority of Americans say, this country, this flag, it really is worth standing up for and treating with utmost respect. And it's really great to see young generations appreciate that and keep that in their own lives. So good on these little boys for doing that. I'm sure they'll be very good patriotic Americans.
Yes, love that story. But unfortunately, this next child is not so pro-American. This one is a little hard to watch.
ISIS releasing a new video reportedly using a 10-year-old American boy, faces blurred here, who claims to be the son of a U.S. soldier deployed to Iraq to deliver a dire warning to President Trump. He says, quote, "My message to Trump, the puppet of the Jews, Allah has promised us victory and promised you defeat. This battle is not going to end in Raqqa or Mosul. It is going to end in your lands. By the will of Allah, we will have victory. So get ready, for the fighting has just begun."
This number 2 story is pretty much the opposite of our number 3. Jarrett, what do you think about this?
It's pretty stunning. I think it shows you, it's just another reminder of what we're up against in this war against ISIS, the Islamic State. What levels they will go to. They will use children in their crusade. They will hide behind innocents. This is not an enemy that can be reasoned with and bargained with. This is one that is militant, it's ideological, it's zealous. It'll use innocent people to essentially forward their agenda. So I think it's just a daily reminder that, we discuss so many issues that are happening domestically in this country. But, this is what we're up against. These are the people that want to destroy this country and everything it stands for. And they're willing to use any means at their disposal to do that. And it's a sickening thing to see. But I'm glad we have occasional reminders of what we're exactly up against.
It's horrifying. It really is. But our next one, we're going to be talking about Hillary. Yes, she's still in the news and we're still talking about her. And listen to what she's claiming now.
This is not okay, I thought. It was the second presidential debate, and Donald Trump was looming behind me. 2 days before, the world heard him brag about groping women. Now we were on a small stage, and no matter where I walked, he followed me closely, staring at me, making faces. It was incredibly uncomfortable. He was literally breathing down my neck. My skin crawled.
I mean, does she need attention? I'm just so confused why we're still talking about this. I mean, I don't know. Donald Trump was behind her, but he wasn't breathing down her neck.
Right.
Like, she dramatized the whole thing so much. What do you think, Daniel?
He definitely wasn't the Joe Biden sort of literal breathing down your neck.
Yeah.
I think you know, look, this is kind of a special pleading on her part, I think. This happens a lot in presidential debates. Some of our viewers may remember when Bush and Gore were debating, and Bush was making a great point, and Al Gore walks right into his path to kind of confront him like a man, and then Bush just kind of nods at him and then continues. Like, that was you know, being up in your personal space, you know, that I think that's not off. I don't think that's off limits in the presidential debate. This is kind of a contest for presidency. So
yeah, she said, you know, instead of smiling and letting it happen, should I have turned around and say, like, back off, you creep? Can you imagine if she would have said that, like, in a debate?
Yeah, I don't know. And it's pretty remarkable how even still she's, you know, deflecting blame for having lost the election. I mean, she didn't go to Wisconsin to campaign, went to Michigan, like, maybe on the toward the end, but she lost the election because she was not a good candidate. And I think, yeah, she needs to take ownership. And speaking of people who don't take ownership, I just had to bring this up. Have you guys listened to Taylor Swift's new song?
I have. I'm not a fan.
Yeah, the new song. This is what look what you made me do is what it's called, right? I think many of our viewers, if you haven't heard it, it's a very unconservative song, I have to say. This is just my soapbox today.
Yes.
But she does not take ownership for responsibility. Usually in past songs, she would say, "Yeah, I made a stupid mistake, but I knew it was going to be, you know, trouble when I walked into it." But now she's just saying, "Look what you made me do. I have no personal agency. I didn't have any ability not to do otherwise." Not conservative.
I'm glad you brought that up. Sad. Very sad. I misread in her better albums. I'm not excited. Anyway, our #1 story, drum roll please, because I don't understand how this is real life. Watch.
And when they saw this happen, their first thought was, we've got to let Clay Travis know that they have moved a guy named Robert Lee, an Asian man no less, off of this UVA William and Mary game to avoid triggering fools who might be upset because he has the same name, somewhat, as Confederate General Robert E. Lee. By the way, there are 11,000 Robert Lees in this country. I would suggest that all of you, if you happen to be watching this right now, just walk right off a bridge and drown yourselves. Your lives are over. You can no longer be employed in MSESPNs.
I mean, come on. Robert Lee? The Asian Robert Lee. Robert E. Lee. Is this, I mean, what do you think, Daniel?
I think this is really laughable. I don't see how many Americans would appreciate this if they're, you know, if they don't work at ESPN. I think MSESPN is about right. I think Trump needs to tweet that because that's a perfect branding of ESPN and what it's become. Look, I think this is obviously political correctness run amok, but it's also a great example of how on the left, ideology and political correctness completely runs roughshod over the individual. They are not seeing this man as an individual. He's Korean heritage. Lee is one of the most common names in Korea. He's not like he's named after Robert E. I mean, I guess I don't know what his parents were thinking, but he didn't choose his last name. They're not respecting the individual. He's a man who earned his place as a broadcaster, and we need to be able to respect him for his position and not judge him based on his name.
Jarrett, what do you think? Is ESPN protecting people in Charlottesville by removing Robert Lee?
This is like, frankly, this is like a poorly written Onion satire article. I mean, it's so egregious that this man who has no connection with Robert Lee, I have to make an admission here. My middle name is Lee, so I may not be allowed to appear on an ESPN broadcast anytime in the near future. So I will just put that out there.
Yeah.
No, it's a ridiculous story. I mean, frankly, I think most Americans with common sense see how ridiculous it is. I mean, what's next? Are we going to get rid of Bruce Lee? Is he going to be gone? I mean, look, there are people with the last name Jackson. It's kind of like Stonewall Jackson.
I'm Davis, Jefferson Davis.
That's Jefferson
that was
Davis.
Not the attention.
There you go. There's a Davis right here. He's no longer to be on ESPN. And I think it shows how Trump was right when he talked about this kind of statues issue. That look, this week it's Robert E. Lee and it's Stonewall Jackson. Next week, George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, and look how quickly we've gone from that debate to saying, well, an Asian American man with the name Robert E. Lee can't appear on an ESPN broadcast because of his name. I mean, this is how quickly. I mean, this
very quick,
very quick within a week's time. I mean, there was another story about this horse for USC, University of Southern California, who had the same name as Robert E. Lee's horse that people were raising a big storm about. This is how ridiculous and nonsensical this movement has become, and it's really become, frankly, quite disturbing in how far it's going in the last few weeks.
Absolutely. Well, thank you guys. Great conversation. Really appreciate it. And thank you all for joining us today. Be sure to join us next week on Friday on our Daily Signals Top 10. We hope you all have a great weekend.